where he is a director of the graduate program in public history and oversees UWF's Digital Humanities Lab. Originally from the great state of Rhode Island, he earned his PhD from the University of Delaware and has lived on the Gulf Coast with his wife and 3 children for almost a decade. His research focuses on American coastal communities, and he is completing a book on the birth of the American beach. This presentation grew out of the work he and his students have done with the Gulf Breeze Area Historical Society. Welcome, Jamin.
Thank you, Teresa. Let's see if this works. Thank you for coming out. It was a wonderful crowd. It's like I'm in my survey class. There's so many people there. This is good. So I don't need that. All right. So I'm excited to share some research with you today that we've been doing into the Benson property. And so the title is A Forgotten Past. This is sort of a hidden history of the Gulf Breeze, the Benson property.
Can you use the microphone just so that everybody can really hear?
Oh.
Is that hard for you to do?
Right. I can try.
Okay.
The invites. Is this okay?
If you want to be up there, I could just hit the button on that for you whenever you want to change slides.
Ooh, good idea for this. Too many, I think. It would get awkward, but thank you. Okay. So I moved to Pensacola with my family for a job at UWF here about 2 years ago. And I have 3 kids, as Teresa mentioned. And the first thing we did, of course, is go to the beach, right? And so we lived in Pensacola, go out to the beach, and it was wonderful. And the best part is that I can claim I'm doing research because I studied. Don't tell my wife. I'm fascinated in beaches, in part because I'm really interested in places that are in between. Right? Beaches are between the ocean and the land, but all different types of in-between places are really fascinating places to explore. And of course, going from Pensacola to the beach, that place in between is here, right? And at first, looking for history, I'm always have my eyes open looking for history. It doesn't jump out at you right now, a historic landscape. It really doesn't. Now, I understand there used to be a lot of buildings, and many of them are gone. But if you look closely, and you get stuck at the red lights enough, you start to notice the historical marker, right? 1824, the first federal highway, which is great. And asking around and learning a little bit, I realized that that gas station, there's been a gas station there for like 70 years, which is fascinating, right? And I don't think that's, I'm not sure if that's the one.
No.
I think that's the one further up by
Where the cottages were.
where the cottages were, allegedly.
That's right next to the Benson complex, because we have a picture of it right next to the
Where the
Benson.
chevron is now.
Mhm.
Is
Where
it?
that chevron is in the left picture.
Where the current Chevron is?
No, it's where the Dunkin' Donuts is.
Oh,
Okay, close.
Excellent. Yes.
We have a picture.
So you'll see, as you all know far more than me, we have the post office, we have the gas station. There's a historic landscape and land use here, which is pretty fascinating. Now I started teaching my classes, which takes a lot of time and effort, and learning how to navigate this area and going to the beach with my kids all the time. I was busy, but I read the newspaper, and I started to hear about this crazy, interesting, fascinating, robust discussion about historic preservation, about history, about how important and controversial the history of Gulf Breeze. And I said, that Gulf Breeze, the same one, right? And I said, this is amazing. And I followed this, and as a historian, to see such a thorough discussion of history is really awesome. I mean, so many people don't talk about history, and they just take it for granted. So to see this conversation was wonderful. The first time I came here to one of these meetings was right before this election, which brought in a new board. And so I wanted to see how I could contribute with my students, with my own work, to support this, help this ongoing conversation. So we had a student group in a digital history class do a digital exhibit based on some research in the Benson house. But I was still curious, and I wanted to see what I could do. Now, I'm not local, right? I don't know, I'm not a specialist in Panhandle history and Santa Rosa, but I know something about doing research, and I know a little bit about coastal communities in the bigger sense. And so I did what we all do when we want to know something. We start kind of follow the money, right? And what better place to start than the property appraiser? So I said, this is the Benson property, what can we learn? So to the property appraiser's website. Now talk about, it's amazing as a historian to what we can find online, and it's a little terrifying what's out there as well of our personal information. So I started here and I said, wonderful, I figured out where that Benson house was. I clicked on it, I got all this great information, which allowed me to go into the historical archives and look for the oldest American records on this land. And that's the Bureau of Land Management out of, they're housed in DC, but they have all this amazing material online. And so here we have the peninsula there, and I lined up with the parcel information on the Benson property, and I was able to kind of zoom in, and it's Section 5, Township 3 South, Range 29 West. It's as archaic as it sounds, okay? But with that, we're able to kind of zoom in here and realize that it's this section right here, that big square. It's in there, which is a good thing to know, I guess. And so I started to see who bought that land first. Because when the United States, of course, took over in 1821, they had a record of who bought the land from the federal government, or who had Spanish claims to that. And the first one we have is in 1888. And that bit of land is bought by a guy named John B. Gully. I said, great. Gully. G-U-L-L-Y. Here's a document, here's this guy. Great, I have a person. Let's go into those local history books. Let's pull out his name. Let's go into the local papers. I'm going to find him. Guess what? I'm going to go ask Barbara. I'm going to ask Betty. Betty, who's Gully?
I don't know who Gully is.
I know. Why are you down here, Yankee? That's what she said. And I said, all right, well, I'll look in the local papers. I'll look in the local census, the city directories. I'll find this man. 1888. I got this. Nothing. And so I cast a wider net, and then I find him in the 1880 federal census. And there he is, John B. Gully, white male, 61. He's married. His wife's either 28 or 48. I think 48. And he's a physician. She's keeping house. And he's in Geneva, Illinois, about 40 miles west of Chicago. That's a picture of the town there on the Fox River. He was born in England. His wife is a second generation Irish. Her father was from New York. Great. Okay. Chicago, here, buying land. What's going on here, right? The questions. So I've researched him a little bit. I want to figure out what he's about. And I find out that he studied medicine in England. He immigrated here in 1847. He graduated from the Hydropathic Institute in New York. Yeah, what is that? Exactly. And in the 1850s, these advertisements on the right are for a water cure treatments in Michigan. It's like a spa and the doctor, kind of. But this was legitimate medicine in the 1850s. This was pretty cutting edge medicine for the most part, in a time when we didn't really have scientific doctors in the way we do now. And so he's doing legitimate medical interventions. And the plates, the images on the left show us hydrotherapy. It came from Germany, and the idea is you put yourself in really cold water. Yep.
Is that Dr. Kellogg?
He's a part of this. Yeah, there's a whole big group of physicians, but he's definitely part of this, and homeopathy as well. And Gully will go into homeopathy, as we'll see in a minute. But the idea is that cold water will pull the disease away from the part that's bothering you. And so they have, you need to sit in cold water for a few hours, you need to bathe in it, you need to put your head in it, you need to have it splashing on you. If you go into the Museum of Commerce downtown, and you go to see the barber shop exhibit in there, if you look closely, you'll see one of these. And I was walking around, I said, why is that in the barber shop? She said, I don't know what it is. I'm like, that's hydrotherapy thing. So that's misplaced right now, but you can actually see it. So I continue to find out some more about him. He's publishing in medical journals. I mean, this is legit work he's doing. He ends up moving from Michigan. He's in Illinois. He graduates. He continues his education, homeopathy. He gets married in 1870. He's prosperous. He's doing well. He's a member of the Unitarian Church. He's a leader in the local Masons. I mean, he's a man of substance. He's a physician. And and then he buys land in Gulf Breeze. 1885, that's a picture, a bird's eye view, just 2 or 3 years before Gully bought this land. Pensacola is booming right now with lumber. It did pretty well. It has the first couple of 2 railroads are in. It's connected. It's on the move. We have our first city directory. Pensacola is becoming a legitimate city. We're a few thousand people, which is lovely. At the same time that Pensacola is growing, we have Florida becoming a place for tourists, invalids, and settlers. We'll take them all. And so chances are you probably fit in one of those 3, right? And apparently Gully did. Pensacola is trying to get those folks to come down. This is before Flagler. This is before this is early. And Pensacola is the spot. It's here or that other first city we won't mention. And we have first-class hotels are open up. Pensacola is a place to be. And these are national advertisements here. So he buys the land, and 3 years later he dies. He dies in 1891. He's getting on a train to go to Chicago. He has a heart attack, and it's gone.
The train from here?
No, he's in Chicago. And so I actually don't have any proof he ever came here. So I have no evidence he ever actually came here. Not to say he didn't come down. Notice his wife's in the insane asylum. We'll loop back. We'll loop back to this. So I'm literally at a dead end now on the story of what's the origin of this area? Like, who owned this part of Gulf Breeze, of the Benson property? Like, where did the story start here? I don't know, because the guy died and we don't know if he ever came here. So I go back to the map. Like, all right, back to the beginning. And I call in the government records and I say, give me everything you have on this Gully file. So I got some of it online, and so $50, 6 weeks later, I get this in. I get about 15 pages of documents that are all the legal documents related to that purchase. And I learned 2 things. 2 things. It was not worth $50. But don't tell UWF that. No. So I found out that the land office, there was a scribbled note, and it said, send the patent, the deed, to Francis Rigby in Evanston, Illinois. Oh, great, another name. In Illinois, wonderful. What do I do with this? Well, he's actually like a big-time real estate dealer in Chicago. He's a millionaire. And I have no idea how he's connected to Gully, who lives 40 miles away. So what I do find out was that 3 years after he got married, his wife, quote, developed a mental disorder and ended up being committed, just like Gully's wife. Now, hydrotherapy was really common, quote unquote, cure for mental disorder. So there's a chance that the two could have crossed paths. They both had women who were committed, or they committed, depending how you look at it. And there was this potential. So this is the asylum where Gully's wife spent much of her time. And so we're getting to like the rabbit hole. Okay? I mean, it's getting kind of out there. I went just a little bit more. And the connection with Rigby to this area was that he and a senator in Chicago tried to create this development called Santa Rosa Park, which is an area, it was like a summer resort that they were going to develop kind of near the golf course, kind of further up east of here a little bit. It didn't actually come to anything. But there are these kind of multiple connections between Chicago and this area. So that's the first thing I found, was this clarifying this connection between Chicago and this part of town. The second part was kind of devastating, where it said he bought section 2, or lot number 2 in section 5. Now you notice there's 2 sections, number 1 and number 2. The whole thing's about 300 acres, this area, and he bought the southern, which if you lay this over the map, that's not our property. And so all of that leads us to that. He bought just south of the Benson property, but it's kind of a fun story. So the Benson, if you look at the legal description, it's in lot 1. So all of that told us that this was not our story. But it's still a story of this community, which is kind of interesting.
It's cool.
So I thought it was worth showing these long-range connections between the early history of where we are and in the 19th century. So this goes back to the local histories I had read and what I had talked to some of you about, which is the Duncan family. They owned all this. They were the first homesteaders, and actually the Duncans do come up, where the first legal document that I have describing the Benson property, it was being transferred to Mary Ann Duncan, who was the wife of George Duncan, who I'll kind of explain in a little bit. But what this document shows was that all of these people owned a stake in this property before she purchased it in the 1920s. Now, I looked up all of them. We'll see Gully, we see Rigby. These are all people who potentially had a claim to this property in the 1920s. Early 1920s when this was done. And all of these names, none of them come up in any of the local histories that have been written about this area. And so these are people who own property here, who are active in some way or another, who are not part of the story right now, which are kind of worth exploring. The Duncans, the 3 brothers, came here in the 1870s. They're out on Town Point. They're out Fairfield Point. This is James Duncan, who was the bachelor, who I found in a newspaper, didn't leave town, didn't leave Gulf Breeze for like 30 years. And he came to Pensacola one day and they wrote a story about him. Pensacola had changed so much. He's like, I haven't been here since, there wasn't electricity and Halifax hadn't been burned down twice. This is amazing. And there was this long article about leaving Gulf Breeze for the first time in 30 years, which was kind of great. It's Nelson's son, Captain George Addison Duncan. He's captain of a U.S. Army Corps of Engineering schooner shown here called the Santa Rosa, and he helped survey the intercoastal waterway. So his job, he was captain of this vessel, and he would go up and down between Apalachicola and Balmobile, and they were just surveying that intercoastal route. He ended up dying in Apalachicola.
And his ghost is still there.
That's what they said. I think it's a research trip, buddy. It's another research trip. So here he is in 1919. He's trying to sell some property with straight across from Halifax Wharf, across the bay, of course, water view. It's in this area here. And so Duncan dies in Apalachicola. His ghost continues to haunt that rapist. The property gets transferred to his wife. Now, she is from New Orleans. Yeah,
Could you back up a minute?
yes.
Who was the seller or the grantor on that deed to Duncan?
It's a quitclaim deed. So these are all the people who potentially have a stake in it, and they have 2 years to claim it. So these are all people who were identified as having some interest in that property. And it's a big, it's most of that set, it's all of this. All of it.
So all those people were the grantors on that quitclaim, or
They couldn't identify them, so there wasn't an explicit grantor. So these are people who the property records had shown at that time, which I haven't found yet, that they could potentially have an interest in the property,
Okay, thank you.
if that makes sense. Yeah, it's not cut and dry.
Did you find that they were maybe from up north and had been sold a bill of goods of the little piece of property down here or something, and and were given a piece of paper to say, here's your portion of it?
I haven't found it yet.
Okay.
So yeah, there's big holes in the property records here. I don't know if they were destroyed or misplaced or just not existent. So there's a lot of threads to continue to search. But where there should be documents locally and nationally, they're not there for this area. It's really spotty. So these are all people that we would, in the future, would want to track down because they were either here, they own property here, but they don't come up in any local county histories. So, which is interesting, right? It's interesting. So the Duncans come. Marion Duncan is in New Orleans. She acquires this property, and it's 1929, which is convenient for her to own property right there because, of course, what are they building? The bridge. And so she gives some of her land, of this land away to build 98 and for the landing of the bridge right there. So she gives that so we can track that through the deeds and everything. And then she lays out she plots the Duncan subdivision shortly thereafter, kind of anticipating the growth that bridge will bring. Of course, this is when we have some of our early families come in. It fills in pretty quickly. 1933, the Johnsons move in, the Bonifaz in 1936 are purchased land, and of course, it's not exactly clear from the land records. But the Bensons come in around 1940-ish or so, at least according to the legal documents.
And they purchased from the Duncans?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. From there, yeah.
Yeah.
So she lays it out. So
They
she's
came in 1935.
yeah, but they didn't buy. They were down by the cottages.
They were with the cottages.
Yeah. So they end up coming up around 1940 or so. Organizations, the people, a lot of that happened in this. The early church meetings, early government meetings, all happened here in this property with a really rich, kind of fascinating, still unknown history with the first commercial, some of the earliest commercial buildings, gas station, and of course their home as it was the last time I saw it and pictured it. So it's kind of a looping story. But I think the big takeaways is that the history of this place, of this community, of this area is a lot richer and more complicated and longer than I think is commonly acknowledged. So I think there's a lot more going on here, which is worth exploring. And as the area's historical society, y'all have work to do. So. I'm happy to take any questions. Kind of sped through it, but thank you.
I had someone tell me that lives in Gulf Breeze proper that the original deed to their house, they were like the second or third owner of their property, that it originally was deeded from Queen Isabella of Spain.
Yes. So there are, when the United States took over the land in 1821, they sent people who had claims from the Spanish, that grants from the Spanish, they would petition the government, the U.S. government, and say, we got this land legally and rightfully from the Spanish crown, and we are claiming that. And they sent around some folks who checked all of that out. And so you can go into the records of Congress, and they explain, yes, this is legitimate, no, this is legitimate. Someone claimed that they 1,000 acres of what is now Fort Pickens, and they said, we got this from the King of Spain, it's all ours, all of it. And the American commissioners came down, they said, no one in their right mind would buy that property. It's sand, you can't grow anything on it, there's no water out there, you can't actually live on it because storms come all the time and wipe it out. Like, why? No, this is ours. This is for the government, it's for defense. That's the only thing it's ever been used for. That's the only thing it will ever be used for. And so they rejected that claim. But they did uphold, there's one claim on here that they upheld. Let me see if I can find it. I forget off the top of my head. William P. Anderson and Laval. They had 626 acres that they had claimed they received from the Spanish crown. So it's probably from that.
Can you tell me, can you point where that is, or what area that is?
That section 6, that's the proper.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes,
Do you know what kind of money John Gully and some of the other ones paid
I do.
to purchase the properties?
I do. I could look them all up. But, so Gully purchased 160 acres, and he bought it at $1.25 an acre. So he paid $200. Today, if you want to, it's hard to calculate. It's not an easy one-to-one. I'm sorry to be like that. It would be about $5,000 today in today's money. So, depending how you calculate it. So, but remember, it's isolated. There's no bridges.
They found out they couldn't grow on it either.
No cattle.
The
right?
Duncans.
Yeah. Yeah. It didn't take
They
them.
had to go to the sea.
It did not take them long to throw up a tourist pavilion.
I
right?
asked Duncan, Duncan, who's a descendant, and I said, what did they do to make a living? He said they went to the sea.
Yeah.
They went to sea.
They went to sea. So if you pull the early federal censuses of this area from the 1920s, from the 1910s, that this was a thriving maritime community, that there were ship pilots, there were tugboat captains, the first ferry operator who would ferry tourists from Palafox to the resort out in on the island, and this is in the 1880s, 1890s, 1910s. During this time, there was a vibrant tourism activity going out there, and he lived in Gulf Breeze. You had a marine railway, like a shipyard that was here, that was really active, and so you look at the people living here and their jobs. They were sailor, ship captain, pilot, ferry operator. It was just a thriving maritime place, which is kind of cool. Yes?
Dr. Wells, I'm from Eloise herself, understand that they came here because they came to take care of the cottages one summer. And she felt like it was a good way for them to get some cash money. It was, during the hard times.
Yeah.
And then they fell in love with it, and they stayed, and they managed as continually, that was my understanding, the cottages that belonged to somebody. And I'm sorry, I do not know who, but I bet the Duncans know about the cottages. And so they stayed, and that's how, then the war came along, and Mark was in the Navy, if I'm not mistaken, and then discharged, and then they had it at a status. She ran everything while he was at war.
Yeah,
The cottages, I don't know when the filling station was established, but I'm not sure exactly where, but that looks kind of familiar to the pictures that I've seen in their home when I visited.
And the post office. She ran
Yeah,
the
given
post
given the
office.
robust conversation on local history that I saw my first couple of months here, I decided I was going to end around 1930, so and let people who know far more than I will ever know about this community own that, and I thought I could help by looking at the older. So yeah, no, I claim no knowledge of this area after about 1930. So. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone so much.